Syracuse needs better defense this season in order to have a chance to match last year's record.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. We are always free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on this week's Poll Friday, I asked you all a question. Where can Syracuse football improve the most from last year to this upcoming season, which is less than 50 days away? So that's what we're going to talk about here on today's show. Now, as good as Syracuse football was last season, and don't get me wrong, they were really good. They went 9-3 in the regular season. Obviously, that big win at the end against Miami. They cap it off by winning the bowl game against Washington State. That gives them 10 wins overall for the season. It was a fantastic year, but they were not perfect. And that's okay to admit. They had an elite offense last season, but there were some areas of their team where they were either middle of the pack in the ACC or, quite frankly, not very good. So that's what we're going to talk about here. Where can Syracuse football improve the most for this upcoming season? And you all voted. There were over 200 votes on this week's Poll Friday. And in first place, all around defense got over 75% of the vote, followed by the rushing attack needing to improve. And then in third place, performance after a bye. We'll get to that later on here in this mini podcast. One thing that I did leave out, and I should not have left it out, to be honest with you, is improvement on special teams. And we can address that very quickly here. Syracuse did hire a new special teams coach this season, Ricky Brumfield. He replaces James Villano. And just to summarize the special teams last year for Syracuse, they were not very good. It really doesn't matter what category you decide to pick. Syracuse special teams last year was definitely the biggest Achilles heel, but also offense and defense impact a game more than special teams. Having said that, we will have a podcast talking all about the special teams at some point before we get into Syracuse and Tennessee coverage for week one. Okay, so we'll go over special teams at some point, but I do want to address, I should have put that in there on this week's Poll Friday, and I do apologize for that. But as far as the options that were available, my thought here is that I'm in agreement with most of you. I do think that the defense overall needs to be a lot better than what it was last season. If we're being honest, the Syracuse football offense, which had the number one passing offense in the country a year ago, is probably going to regress. And that's not necessarily taking a shot at them. It's more like, what are the odds you can replicate being the number one passing offense in the country? Probably not very likely. I do think that Syracuse will have a good offense, but I don't think it's going to be as good as last season. And so in order to make up for it, Syracuse needs to be a lot better on defense. And we talked about this earlier in the week, that Syracuse and their defense, if you look at any of the categories, any of the major categories, whether it's points allowed, yards allowed, pass yards allowed, rush yards per carry, yards per completion, red zone defense, turnovers, sacks, whatever category you decide to pick, Syracuse was not particularly good relative to the rest of the ACC in any of those categories. In fact, they were usually either mediocre or towards the bottom of the conference. Last year, Syracuse held two of its opponents to under 20 points. One of them was Holy Cross. The other was NC State. Syracuse also allowed 30-plus points 6 times last year. 6 times. So nearly half of the games Syracuse played in, they allowed at least 30 points. But fortunately for Syracuse, in those 6 games, they went 4-2. And the reason why they went 4-2 is because, like we talked about earlier, Syracuse had the number 1 passing attack in the country. They could simply outscore opponents. And they also held the ball for over 33 minutes per game, which led the ACC in average time of possession. So that's how Syracuse was able to overcome what was a pretty mediocre at best defense last season. So when I look at 2025, okay, it's pretty logical. The offense is probably not going to be as good as it was last year, but it's still probably going to be decent, or at minimum decent, probably pretty good as well, assuming that one of Syracuse's starting quarterbacks or potential starting quarterbacks is good, Steve Angeli or Ricky Collins. But because the offense is going to regress slightly, the defense is going to have to progress slightly. But what are your thoughts? Comment in the comment section below. Do you believe that defense is where Syracuse needs to improve the most in 2025 from 2024? Comment in the comment section below. Now, coming up, we'll discuss the rushing attack as well as performance after a bye for this upcoming season. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. And you're already following along the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling? And guess what? Speaking of baseball season, it's back. After the All-Star break, the trade deadline is coming up very soon. It's the perfect time to get with FanDuel and maybe place a wager on who you think is going to win the World Series this year. And hey, if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. New customers can bet just $5. And hey, if it wins, you get $150 in bonus bets. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. This is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and on this week's Poll Friday, I asked you all the question, where do you think Syracuse football can improve the most from 2024 to the upcoming 2025 season, which is less than 50 days away? Syracuse taking on Tennessee in Atlanta, Georgia at the end of August. Earlier, we talked about how Syracuse, because their offense overall is probably not going to be as good, is going to need to make up for it on defense and being better pretty much in every statistical category. But there are other areas where Syracuse can improve, and we touched on that earlier as well, talking about the special teams. Again, I apologize. That should have been a choice for this week's Poll Friday. One of the other areas to improve is the rushing attack. And again, there is no LaQuint Allen for Syracuse in 2025. He was Syracuse's starting running back for the past 2 seasons, played at an all-conference level, all-purpose running back, 3-down back. Whatever you can describe LaQuint Allen in so many different ways. Mr. Everything, over 20 touchdowns last year. He was sensational. But Syracuse, and we've talked about it before, even with LaQuint Allen last season, they were 3rd worst in the ACC in rushing yards per game. But more importantly, because, hey, they threw the ball a lot, so they're not really handing the ball off a ton. In fact, they had the 3rd fewest rushing attempts per game, which makes sense. So it kind of falls in line. But what's concerning is they were also 3rd worst in yards per carry in the ACC a year ago. And in order for Syracuse to improve its rushing attack for 2025, there are a few things that definitely need to happen. Number one is that Yassine Willis or any one of the young running backs, whether it's Jaden Hart or Malachi James, they are going to have to take a big step forward in development. Number 2, you got to hope that Will Nixon can stay healthy this season. He was a transfer from Washington last year. I thought he looked pretty good. He only played in a few games, but in those few games, I thought he looked promising. It was a limited number of carries, limited number of snaps in general. Again, he's behind LaQuint Allen. But hey, a healthy Will Nixon, hopefully this upcoming season, I think he could be pretty good. He is a in my opinion, I've said it before, a sneaky veteran player who could have a Trevor Pena type jump where you may not see it coming and then all of a sudden just boom, the guy explodes and has a big year. It could happen with a guy like Will Nixon, but you just got to hope he can stay healthy for that chance to even occur. And number 3 is the new offensive line. We're going to have a podcast at some point this offseason talking about Syracuse's offensive line for 2025, and pretty much every single starter has been replaced. We were hoping that, hey, Mark Petrie, he's returning. He's going to be either one of Syracuse's guards or a starting center. Well, unfortunately, he's out for the season with a knee injury, which is a real bummer. So with that being said, now Syracuse, I think, is going to have 5 new starters on its offensive line unless Demetrius Witherspoon wins one of the tackle jobs. They're either going to have 4 or 5 new starters on the offensive line. So they're going to have to gel quickly and hopefully be better than what they were last season. So those are the ways where Syracuse, or the ways in which Syracuse is going to have to improve upon its rushing attack in 2025 compared to last year. And finally, you got performance after a bye. Syracuse football, they went 0-2 after a bye. They had a brutal but close home loss against Stanford. That was the 3rd game of the season. And then to kick off the second half of the year, Syracuse was 5-1. They're feeling pretty good. It's a Thursday night against Pitt on the road, and they get demolished. That was not a good game from start to finish. The common theme in both of those losses is that Syracuse came out flat. Now, they nearly mounted a comeback against Stanford because Stanford was not a good team. And Syracuse should not have lost to Stanford, but they came out flat. They tried to mount a comeback, and it was just too little too late. They end up giving up a game-winning field goal as time expired. But you don't want to come out flat after a bye. Not good. And then with Pitt, they also came out flat, and Pitt is also a better team, and they were at home. And so Syracuse ended up getting crushed in that game. Now, as far as for this season and performance after a bye, I'm hoping that Syracuse can just go 1-1. And the reason why I'm hoping they go 1-1 is because the first bye comes in early to mid-October, and following that bye, they play at home against the Pitt Panthers. So they're going to play Pitt once again after a bye this season, but at least they'll be at home. Take that for what it's worth. The second bye is in mid-November, and following that bye week, Syracuse is traveling to Notre Dame, a game I am not confident that Syracuse is going to win. Hence why I said a minute ago, I hope that Syracuse can just go 1-1 after a bye this season. At least get that home win against Pitt. Yeah, you'll probably lose to Notre Dame, but to be honest with you, they could have a bye, not a bye, short rest, long rest, right? I don't think it's necessarily going to matter against a team like Notre Dame on the road, but hey, you never know, right? But hopefully Syracuse can go 1-1 after a bye this season compared to last year where they went 0-2. Where do you think Syracuse can improve the most from 2024 to 2025? I'd love to see your comments in the comment section below. Now, as far as what is coming up on Locked On Syracuse here in the near future, barring any big breaking news, there will not be a podcast this weekend. The good news is that we should be back on Monday, probably talking about Syracuse football once again. So that's what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the near future. And thank you for making us your first listen today. And for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On Portal Show with football recruiting expert Brian Smith, who's got the latest rumors and signings each and every day. Be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape, who's doing well in recruiting, who's falling behind in recruiting, all that and more on the Locked On Portal podcast. And you can find the Portal podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. And hey, if you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse so this channel can grow, reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And I will see you all again soon.